I stood on the porch, the rain pelting my back, soaking through my thin jacket. The door in front of me, once a symbol of home, now felt like a stranger's wall. My husband, David, had just slammed it in my face, his voice still echoing in my head. "You're useless now, Claire. No job, no money, no place here." His words stung sharper than the cold. I clutched my duffel bag, the weight of it grounding me as my world unraveled. He didn't know. He couldn't know. Tucked away in a hidden account, locked behind passwords and lies, was my secret of fortune I'd built in silence, dollar by dollar, over years of betrayal. I wasn't the broken woman he thought he'd cast out. I was something else entirely. And soon, he'd see. The rain blurred the streetlights as I turned away, my boots splashing in puddles. My mind churned, replaying the last 6 months. I'd lost my job at the tech firm, a casualty of corporate downsizing. David, once my partner in every sense, had turned cold, his disappointment palpable. He'd always measured love in dollars, in status, in what I could bring to the table. When I stopped bringing anything, his mask slipped. Tonight wasn't the first time he'd humiliated me, but it was the last. I'd let him think I was nothing. Let him believe I was the failure he sneered at. It was easier that way. Safer. While I planned my escape. But now, standing in the rain, I felt the first spark of something dark. Hera need not just to leave, but to make him pay. I walked to the end of the street, my breath visible in the chilly air. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban stillness that hid secrets behind every manicured lawn. I knew those secrets better than most. David's late-night business calls, the perfume on his shirts that wasn't mine, the way his eyes avoided me when I asked questions. I'd known for years he was cheating, but I stayed. Not out of love. Not anymore. But because I was building something he'd never see coming. My fortune wasn't just money, it was power. A weapon I'd forged in the shadows of his contempt. I checked into a cheap motel that night, the neon sign buzzing outside my window. As I sat on the stiff bed, I opened my laptop and logged into the account. The numbers glowed. $3. 2 million. My heart raced. Not with pride, but with purpose. The next morning, I sat in a diner, nursing a coffee that tasted like regret. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Emily, where are you? David's telling everyone you left him." I almost laughed. Of course. He'd spin the story, paint himself the victim. Emily was the only one I'd trusted with pieces of the truth, though not all of it. She knew about David's affairs, about the way he'd chipped away at my confidence. But she didn't know about the money. No one did. I'd started siphoning funds years ago, when I first suspected David's infidelity. Small amounts at first. Bonuses and side projects funneled into an offshore account. Then, as his cruelty grew, so did my ambition. I'd taken risks, invested in startups, played the stock market with a precision David never credited me for. Now, I was untouchable, but I wasn't ready to disappear yet. I called Emily from the diner, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'm fine," I told her. "I just need time." She begged me to come stay with her, but I refused. This wasn't about running to safety. This was about justice. David had taken everything from me: my dignity, my trust, my sense of home. Now, I take something from him. Not just his pride, though that would hurt. I wanted his world to crumble, the way mine had. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own choices. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the diner's window. My eyes were sharp, alive with a fire I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just Claire, the discarded wife. I was Claire, the architect of his downfall. That afternoon, I rented a small apartment across town, a nondescript place where no one would look for me. I paid in cash, using a fake name. The landlord didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. Inside, I set up my laptop and began mapping out my plan. David's business, a real estate firm he'd built on charm and lies, was his pride and joy. He thought it was untouchable, just like he thought I was. But I knew its weaknesses. I'd been the one to manage the books in the early days, before he decided I was better suited to staying home. I knew where the cracks were, the deals he'd fudged, the clients he'd misled. I'd kept records, emails, documents he thought I'd never understand. They were my leverage now. As night fell, I sat at the tiny kitchen table, my laptop screen casting a blue glow across the room. I drafted an email to David's biggest client, a developer named Md Tate. The message was anonymous, a carefully worded hint about discrepancies in David's contracts. I didn't send it yet. Timing was everything. I needed to build the pressure. Let David feel the walls closing in before he even knew I was the one holding the hammer. I leaned back, my mind racing with possibilities. Revenge wasn't just about destruction, it was about precision, about making every move count. David had kicked me out, thinking he'd won. He had no idea I was just getting started. I kept my distance, staying invisible. David didn't know where I was, and I wanted it that way. Emily called daily, her voice thick with worry. "Claire, you can't just vanish," she said one evening, her words crackling through the phone. I told her I was safe, that I needed space. She didn't push, but I could hear the questions she didn't ask. I hated lying to her, but the truth was too dangerous. If she knew about the money, about my plan, she'd try to stop me. Emily believed in forgiveness, in second chances. I used to, too. But David had burned that part of me to ash. Now, I believed in consequences. By the end of the week, Md Tate had pulled out of a major deal with David. I saw it on a local business blog, a small mention buried in an article about real estate trends. My heart raced as I read it. David would be scrambling, making calls, spinning lies to cover the loss. I imagined him in his office, tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. He'd always prided himself on control, but I was unraveling it, thread by thread. I sent another email, this time to a reporter who'd been sniffing around David's firm for months. I attached a single documented contract with forged signatures. I didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. The reporter would dig, and David would squirm. I wasn't cruel. Not really. I didn't want David's life destroyed for destruction's sake. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt: helpless, exposed, betrayed. Every night, I lay awake, the weight of my secret fortune pressing against my chest. It wasn't just money. It was years of my silence, my pain, my resilience. I'd built it to escape, to start over. But now it was something more. It was my shield, my sword. I used some of it to hire a private investigator, a discreet man named Paul who asked no questions. I tasked him with following David, documenting his meetings, his late-night drives. Paul's first report came in 2 days later. David was seeing someone new, a woman named Laura, a paralegal from his office. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation stung, a fresh cut over old scars. I met Paul at a park, far from my apartment. He handed me a folder with photos of David and Laura at a restaurant, laughing, his hand on hers. I stared at the images, my stomach twisting. Not because I loved him anymore, but because he'd moved on so easily, as if I'd never mattered. Paul's voice was gruff, professional. He's meeting her regularly. Looks serious. I nodded, tucking the folder into my bag. Keep watching, I said. I didn't tell him what I planned to do with the information. I wasn't sure myself yet, but it was another piece of the puzzle. Another lever to pull when the time was right. Back at my apartment, I pored over the photos, my mind racing. Laura wasn't just a fling. She was part of David's new narrative. The one where he was the successful businessman with a perfect life, free of his useless wife. I wondered if she knew about me. If David had told her I was the one who left. The thought made my blood boil. I opened my laptop and started drafting another email, this time to Laura's work address. I didn't send it. Not yet. I needed to know more about her. About what she meant to David. Was she a pawn in his game? Or was she complicit? I needed to be sure before I made my next move. The days stretched on, each one a step closer to my goal. I kept my routine simple coffee at the diner. Hours at the library researching David's business. Late nights plotting in my apartment. I avoided social media, knowing David was likely posting lies about our separation. Emily sent me screenshots. Her texts laced with outrage. He's saying you abandoned him. Claire. People believe him. I didn't respond. Let them believe. The truth would come out soon enough. I focused on the next phase of my plan, targeting David's reputation. His business relied on trust, on the image he'd built. I'd tear it down, not with lies, but with the truth he thought he'd buried. I contacted a former colleague, Sarah, who'd left David's firm under murky circumstances. We met at a cafe, her eyes wary as she scanned the room. I know what he did to you, I said, keeping my voice low. She flinched, then nodded. Sarah had been pushed out after questioning David's accounting practices. She had evidence emails, memos, proof of his shortcuts. I offered her a deal, share what she had, and I'd make sure she was protected. She hesitated, then agreed. That night, I added her documents to my growing arsenal. David's empire was built on sand, and I was the storm coming to wash it away. I started tailing David myself, careful to stay out of sight. I borrowed a car from Emily, claiming I needed it for errands. She didn't ask questions, though her eyes lingered on me, searching for the sister she used to know. I drove to David's office, parking across the street. He emerged at dusk, his suit crisp, his smile practiced as he shook hands with a client. I watched, my hands tight on the steering wheel. He looked so sure of himself, so untouched by the chaos I was sowing. It infuriated me, but it also fueled me. I followed him to a bar, where he met Laura. They sat close, her laughter cutting through the night. I took photos from the car, my phone's camera zooming in on their carefree faces. Every image was a brick in the wall I was building. The reporter's article hit the local news site a week later. It was small, buried in the business section, but it was enough. Local real estate firm faces questions over contract irregularities. I read it in my apartment, a grim smile spreading across my face. David would see it. His clients would see it. The cracks were spreading, and he'd feel the pressure soon. I sent another email to Laura, this time from a burner account. Ask David about the Tate deal. It read, "He's not who you think." I didn't expect her to confront him directly, but I wanted her to doubt, to question the man she thought she knew. Doubt was a powerful weapon. Emily called that night, her voice trembling. "Claire, there's a rumor David's in trouble. Did you see the article?" I played dumb, saying I'd been offline, focused on healing. She didn't buy it. Not completely, but she didn't push. I hated keeping her in the dark, but this wasn't her fight. Emily had always been the peacemaker, the one who believed in talking things out. I used to be like that, before David taught me that some betrayals cut too deep for words. I promised to visit her soon, then hung up, my mind already back on the plan. The next step was riskier, exposing David's affair to his inner circle. I contacted Paul, the investigator, and asked for more on Laura. His next report was detailed. Laura wasn't just a paralegal. She was ambitious, climbing the ranks at David's firm. She'd been with him for months, maybe longer. Paul included a photo of her at a company event, her arm linked with David's, both of them smiling for the camera. I stared at it, my chest tight. Not with jealousy, but with clarity. Laura wasn't innocent. She was part of David's world, complicit in his lies. I decided to send her the photo, anonymously, with a single line, "He's still married." Let her wrestle with that. The fallout came faster than I expected. Paul called 2 days later. Laura confronted David at the office. It got heated. She's threatening to quit. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. I hadn't anticipated her reacting so publicly, but it was perfect. David's carefully curated image was fraying at the edges. I imagined him scrambling to placate her, to keep his affair from spilling into his professional life. But I wasn't done. I sent another tip to the reporter, this time about David's unpaid vendors. The article that followed was bigger. Front page material, real estate mogul faces mounting allegations. I read it in the diner, my coffee growing cold as I savored every word. David called me that night. I hadn't expected it, and the sound of his voice sent a jolt through me. "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his tone a mix of anger and fear. I stayed silent, letting him stew. "If you're behind this, you'll regret it." I hung up, my hands shaking. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. It didn't matter. He couldn't prove anything, and I was too far gone to stop. I opened my laptop and checked my account, $3. For $1 million now, growing steadily as my investments paid off. It was my safety net, my proof that I wasn't the woman he'd tried to break. I met Sarah again, this time at her apartment. She was nervous, her eyes darting to the windows. "They're auditing the firm," she whispered. "Because of the articles." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, I was electric. The audit would uncover everything: David's lies, his fraud, his betrayal. Sarah handed me a USB drive with more documents. "This is everything I have," she said. "Be careful, Claire." I thanked her, promising to keep her out of it. As I left, I felt the weight of her trust, her fear. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. This was for everyone David had hurt, everyone he'd used. That night, I lay awake, the USB drive on my bedside table. I thought about Emily, about the sister I'd pushed away to protect her. I thought about Laura, caught in David's web, maybe unaware of how deep it went. I thought about David, alone in his office, realizing too late that he'd underestimated me. The money was my power, but this watching his world collapse was my justice. I closed my eyes, not with peace, but with purpose. The storm was coming, and I was its architect. I kept moving, staying one step ahead. David's call had rattled me, but it also sharpened my focus. He was scared, and scared people make mistakes. I met Paul at a gas station, far from prying eyes. He handed me a new report. David was liquidating assets, trying to cover his tracks. "He's desperate," Paul said, his voice low. "Meeting with lawyers, shredding documents." I nodded, tucking the report into my bag. Shredding wouldn't save him. I had copies of everything, stored in a cloud account he'd never find. My fortune gave me freedom, but my evidence gave me control. I decided to escalate. I sent an anonymous package to the state attorney's office, filled with Sarah's documents and my own. It was a risk, but a calculated one. The authorities would dig deeper than any reporter, and they'd find what I'd found, a pattern of fraud stretching back years. I didn't sign my name, didn't leave a trace. Let David think it was a disgruntled employee, a betrayed client. Let him look over his shoulder, wondering who was coming for him. I spent the evening in my apartment, the city's lights flickering outside my window. My phone buzzed Emily again. Claire, David's losing it. He showed up at my house, asking about you. My stomach tightened. He was closer than I'd thought. I called Emily, keeping my voice calm. What did he say? She hesitated, then spilled it. David was ranting, accusing me of sabotaging his business, demanding to know where I was. Emily had told him nothing, but she was shaken. He's not himself. Claire, be careful. I promised I would, but my mind was racing. David was unraveling, and that made him dangerous. I needed to protect Emily, to keep her out of this. I wired her money from my account, enough to cover a vacation. Go visit Mom. I texted her. Get out of town for a while. She argued, but eventually agreed. I breathed easier knowing she was safe. The next day, I followed David again. He was meeting Laura at a hotel, his face drawn as he scanned the parking lot. I watched from a distance, my camera ready. They argued outside, her arms crossed, his hands gesturing wildly. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. The photos told the story, a man on the edge, a woman pulling away. I sent one to Laura's work email, with a new message: he's lying to you, just like he lied to me. I wanted her to doubt him, to see the cracks in his charm. If she left him, his isolation would be complete. I wasn't just destroying his business. I was dismantling his life. The articles kept coming, each one sharper than the last. Real estate firm faces fraud allegations. One read. Another mentioned a federal investigation. I read them in the library, my heart pounding with every word. David's world was collapsing, and I was the invisible hand pushing it down. But something gnawed at me, a flicker of doubt. Was this enough? Would ruining him heal the wounds he'd left? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the next move. I contacted another former employee, a man named Tom who'd been fired after questioning David's ethics. Tom was bitter, eager to talk. He gave me more evidence: audio recordings of David bragging about dodging taxes. I added them to my arsenal, my resolve hardening. That night, David called again. I let it go to voicemail, his voice raw with desperation. Claire, we need to talk. Whatever you're doing, stop. I'll give you anything you want. I deleted the message, my hand steady. He thought he could bargain, but he had nothing I wanted. Not anymore. I opened my laptop and checked my account. $3. 6 million. The number felt like a heartbeat, steady and strong. I didn't need his money, his house, his love. I had my own power now, and I'd use it to finish what I'd started. I met Tom at a dive bar, the kind of place David would never set foot in. He slid a USB drive across the table, his eyes hard. This will bury him, he said. I listened to the recordings later, alone in my apartment. David's voice, smug and careless, boasting about his schemes. It was damning, undeniable. I sent it to the reporter, with a note: check the dates. He's been doing this for years. The next article would be the final blow, the one that would bring the authorities to his door. I leaned back, the weight of my plan settling over me. I was close. So close. But something inside me shifted. Revenge felt heavy, like a stone in my chest. I ignored it, focusing on the endgame. David would fall, and I'd be free. I stopped tailing David. It was too risky now. Paul's reports kept me updated. David was holed up in his office, barely leaving, his phone glued to his ear. Laura had left him, her resignation public and messy. I'd seen it coming, but it still sent a jolt through me. She'd been his last anchor, and now he was adrift. I wondered if she'd seen my emails, if they'd tipped the scales. Part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her I understood her pain, but I didn't. She'd chosen him, at least for a while. She wasn't my ally, just another piece on the board. Emily called from our mother's house, her voice lighter but still edged with worry. Claire, it's bad. David's face is all over the news. Did you do something? I deflected, saying I was just trying to move on. She didn't believe me, but she let it go. I hated the distance between us, the secrets I'd built to protect her. I promised to visit soon, to explain everything when the time was right. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of my choices pressing down. I'd wanted justice, but this felt like something else, something colder, sharper. I opened my laptop, checking my account. $3. 8 million. It was more than enough to start over, to leave this city and its ghosts behind. But I wasn't ready to walk away. I sent the last of my evidence to the state attorney's office, a final package with Tom's recordings and a detailed timeline of David's fraud. It was anonymous, untraceable, but it would seal his fate. I imagined him in handcuffs, his smug face pale as he realized there was no way out. The thought should have thrilled me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name: regret, maybe, or exhaustion. I'd spent months building this trap, and now that it was closing, I wondered what came next. Who was I without this fight? I pushed the question away, focusing on the present. David wasn't done yet, and neither was I. A week later, Paul called with news. David had been arrested. It was all over the local channels. Grainy footage of him being let out of his office in cuffs. I watched it in my apartment, the TV casting flickering shadows across the room. His face was blank, his eyes hollow. I waited for satisfaction, for the rush of victory, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd poured everything into this moment and had nothing left. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, my hands clasped tightly. The money, the evidence, the plan, it had all worked. So why did I feel like I'd lost something? 2. I visited Emily the next day, driving to our mother's house in the countryside. The air was cleaner there, the silence softer. Emily met me at the door, her eyes searching mine. It's over, isn't it? She asked. I nodded, unable to speak. We sat on the porch, the sun warm on our faces, and I told her everything. The money, the plan, the years of hiding my strength while David tore me down. She listened, her face a mix of shock and pride. You didn't just survive him, she said. You fought back. I smiled, but it felt fragile. Fighting back had cost me something I couldn't name, something I wasn't sure I could get back. We talked for hours, the weight of my secrets lifting with every word. Emily didn't judge, didn't lecture. She just held my hand, her warmth anchoring me. I realized how much I'd missed her, how much I'd isolated myself in my quest for justice. As the sun set, I made a decision. I'd use the money to start over, but not alone. I'd bring Emily with me, if she wanted. We could build something new, something free of David's shadow. The thought gave me hope. A flicker of light in the darkness I'd carried for so long. Back in the city, I tied up loose ends. I donated a chunk of my fortune to a local women's shelter. Anonymously. It felt right. Like a way to balance the scales. I kept enough to start a new life. To buy a small house somewhere quiet. Maybe near the coast. I imagined mornings with coffee on a porch. Emily visiting. The sound of waves replacing the city's hum. But first, I had one last thing to do. I wrote a letter to David. Not to send, but to free myself. I poured out everything me pain. My anger. My strength. I burned it in the apartment's sink. Watching the flames consume the words. I didn't need him to hear them. They were for me. I met Paul one last time. At the same gas station. He handed me a final report. His face unreadable. He's out on bail. He said. But the case is airtight. He's done. I nodded, tucking the report away. I didn't need it anymore. But it felt like closure. A final thread to snip. Paul studied me. His eyes narrowing. You okay, Claire? I forced a smile. Said I was fine. He didn't push. Just tipped his hat and left. I drove back to my apartment. The city blurring past. For the first time, I wondered if I'd gone too far. If I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Emily called that night. Her voice bright with an idea. Come with me to the coast. She said. There's a house for sale. Small but perfect. We could start over. Together. I hesitated. The weight of my choices pressing down. I'd spent so long fighting. Planning. Hiding. The idea of a new life. One without revenge or secrets. Felt foreign. Almost frightening. But her voice was a lifeline. Pulling me back to the person I used to be. Okay. I said finally. Let's do it. She laughed. A sound that warmed me from the inside out. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. I started packing. Sorting through the fragments of my old life. The duffel bag from that rainy night sat in the corner. A reminder of how far I'd come. I found an old photo of David and me. From early in our marriage. Both of us smiling like we believed in forever. I stared at it. My throat tight. I didn't love him anymore. But I mourned the version of myself who had. I tucked the photo away. Not ready to throw it out, but not needing to carry it either. The money gave me choices. But I was starting to see that freedom wasn't just about wealth, it was about letting go. The next day, I drove to the courthouse. David's hearing was public, and I needed to see it. To make it real. I sat in the back, unrecognizable in a scarf and sunglasses. David stood at the defendant's table, his suit wrinkled, his face pale. He didn't look like the man who'd thrown me out, who'd built an empire on lies. He looked small, broken. The prosecutor laid out the charges: fraud, tax evasion, forgery. My evidence was there, woven into every accusation, though no one knew it was mine. David's lawyer argued for leniency, but the judge's face was stone. I left before the verdict, my heart pounding. I didn't need to hear it. I'd done what I came to do. On the drive back, I stopped at a park, the same one where I'd met Paul. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold. I sat on a bench, watching families laugh and play. I thought about my own family, fractured by David's betrayal, but not destroyed. Emily was waiting for me, ready to build something new. I thought about Laura, starting over somewhere, maybe wiser now. I thought about Sarah and Tom, free from David's shadow. My revenge had torn down his world, but it had also cleared space for others to heal. Maybe that was enough. I called Emily from the park, telling her I was ready to move. She was already looking at houses, sending me photos of a cottage by the sea. It's got a porch, she said, her voice teasing. Perfect for morning coffee. I laughed, the sound surprising me. It felt good, like a crack in the armor I'd worn too long. We made plans to visit the house that weekend, to start imagining a life beyond the city, beyond David. I hung up, my chest lighter. The money was still there, a safety net, but it wasn't my purpose anymore. My purpose was this connection, hope, a chance to be whole again. That night, I dreamed of the ocean, waves crashing against a shore I'd never seen. I woke with a sense of clarity, a path forward. I'd spent years hiding, first from David, then from myself. No more. I started writing again, not a letter to David, but a journal for me. I wrote about the pain, the anger, the strength I'd found. I wrote about Emily, about the house we'd build together. The words flowed, raw and honest, a map of who I was becoming. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed a life rebuilt, not on secrets, but on truth. Back in the city, I tied up the last loose ends. I closed my old apartment lease, leaving behind the sticky notes and secrets. I donated more of the fortune to local charities anonymously, always anonymously. The act felt like shedding skin, letting go of the weight I'd carried. I kept enough to live comfortably, to give Emily and me a cushion, but the rest wasn't mine to hoard. It was blood money in a way, born from pain and betrayal. Giving it away felt like redemption, a step toward the person I wanted to be. I heard from Paul one last time. David had been convicted, sentenced to 7 years. The news didn't surprise me, but it settled something inside me, like a door closing softly. I didn't need to see him suffer anymore. I'd thought revenge would fill the hole he'd left, but it hadn't. It was this moving forward, building something new that was starting to heal me. I thanked Paul, paid him generously, and told him I was done. He didn't ask where I was going, just wished me luck. I appreciated that, the quiet respect of a man who'd seen me at my darkest. Emily and I moved into the cottage a week later. The first night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. She asked me about the money, about how I'd built it. I told her the truth: years of careful investments, hidden accounts, a secret I'd kept even from myself at times. She listened, her eyes wide, then squeezed my hand. "You're incredible, Claire," she said. I didn't feel incredible, but I felt seen, and that was enough. We talked late into the night, about our childhood, our dreams, the future. For the first time, I believed in that future. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping women rebuild their lives after leaving toxic relationships. It wasn't planned, just something that felt right. I listened to their stories, saw my own pain reflected in their eyes. I didn't tell them about the money, but I used it quietly, paying for their legal fees, covering rent, offering a hand up. It wasn't charity. It was solidarity. I'd been where they were, and I'd found my way out. I wanted them to know they could, too. The work grounded me, gave me purpose beyond revenge. I was starting to see that justice wasn't just about tearing down, it was about building up. One afternoon, I got a letter. Not from David, but from Laura. It was short, handwritten, her words careful but raw. She apologized for her part in things, said she hadn't known about me at first, hadn't wanted to believe David was capable of such betrayal. She was starting over, too, in a new city, a new job. "I saw what you did," she wrote. Not just to him, but for others. "Thank you." I read it twice, my hands trembling. I didn't hate her anymore. She'd been caught in David's web, just like I had. I wrote back, A simple note wishing her well. I didn't need her forgiveness, but I needed to let go of my anger. The seasons changed. The cottage becoming a home. Emily painted the walls a soft blue. Hung photos of us laughing on the beach. I kept writing, filling journals with thoughts I'd never shared. I wrote about David. Not with hate, but with clarity. He'd shaped me, but he didn't define me. I wrote about the women at the community center, their courage inspiring me. I wrote about Emily, my anchor, my family. The money was still there, a quiet presence, but it wasn't my strength anymore. My strength was this life, these connections, this chance to be whole. I walked the beach one morning, the waves crashing gently. I thought about the night David kicked me out, the rain soaking my skin, the duffel bag in my hand. I'd been broken then, but not destroyed. I'd built something from that pine-off fortune, a plan, a new beginning. I didn't regret what I'd done. David had earned his consequences, and I'd earned my freedom. But as I stood there, the wind in my hair, I realized I didn't need to carry the anger anymore. I let it go, let it drift out with the tide. I was Claire, not the wife he'd discarded, not the avenger I'd become. Just Claire, standing in the sunlight, ready for whatever came next. Emily started a garden behind the cottage, her hands in the dirt, coaxing life from the earth. She'd always been the dreamer, the one who saw beauty in the smallest things. I watched her one afternoon, her face lit with pride as she showed me the first blooms. "This is ours, Claire," she said, her voice soft but sure. I nodded, my throat tight. Ours. Not David's. Not the past's. But ours. We invited friends over, new ones from the community center, old ones who'd stood by me. The cottage filled with voices, with warmth, with the kind of love I'd forgotten existed. I realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was building a family. I kept writing, my journals piling up in a drawer. They weren't just about the past anymore. I wrote about the present, the way the ocean sounded at night, the way Emily's laughter filled the house, the way the women at the center trusted me with their stories. I wrote about hope, about redemption, about the quiet strength of starting over. One day, I found myself writing about David, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. He'd had everything: love, trust, a chance at a good life, and he'd thrown it away. I didn't need to hate him anymore. I'd outgrown him. A year after the move, I got a call from Sarah. She'd started her own consulting firm, using the skills David had tried to bury. "I heard about your work," she said. "You're making a difference, Claire." I smiled, surprised by how much her words meant. She told me about the others: Tom, who'd gone back to school; Laura, who was thriving in her new city. David's fall had ripple effects, freeing people I hadn't even considered. Sarah invited me to visit, to talk about collaborating on a project for women in business. I agreed, feeling a spark of excitement. My fortune had given me power, but my choices were giving me purpose. One evening, I walked to the beach alone, the stars bright above. I carried a small box, one I'd kept hidden in my closet. Inside was the photo of David and me, the one from our early days. I sat on the sand, the waves a steady heartbeat. I looked at the photo, at the woman I'd been hopeful, trusting, unaware of the storms to come. I didn't hate her, didn't pity her. She'd done what she could with what she knew. I tore the photo into pieces, letting the wind carry them out to sea. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't vengeful. It was just time. The community center threw a fundraiser, and I helped organize it. We raised enough to expand the program, to reach more women. I stood at the back of the room, watching the crowd volunteers, Survivors. Friends. Emily was there, her arm around a young woman who'd just moved into her own apartment. I felt a swell of pride, not for the money I'd given, but for the life I was part of. This was my justice. Not the articles or the arrest, but this people coming together, healing, growing. I'd thought revenge would set me free, but it was this work, this love, that did. Emily and I celebrated the anniversary of our move with a bonfire on the beach. We invited everyone, neighbors, friends, women from the center. The fire crackled, casting shadows on our faces. Someone played a guitar, and we sang, our voices carrying over the waves. I looked at Emily, her eyes reflecting the flames, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The money was still there, a quiet safety net, but it wasn't my story anymore. My story was here, in the laughter, the warmth, the life we'd built from the ashes of the old. As the fire died down, I walked to the water's edge, the sand cool under my feet. I thought about the night David kicked me out, the rain, the duffel bag, the secret I'd carried. I'd been so sure revenge was the answer, that tearing him down would make me whole. It hadn't. Not entirely. But it had cleared the way for a life I'd chosen, not one forced on me. I looked back at the fire, at Emily's silhouette, at the people who'd become my family. I was Claire, not defined by David or the fortune, but by the woman I'd become. The ocean stretched out before me, endless and free, and I knew I was home.